Hey everyone, welcome to the Deadly Duo Chronicles podcast. I'm Cheyenne.
And I'm Heather.
And on today's murder menu is
Larry Bittaker and Roy Norris, the Toolbox killers. But first, let's talk about some trigger warnings. SA, murder, torture, graphic details of the crimes.
Viewer discretion is advised. Lawrence Bittaker, born September 27th, 1940, to a teen mom who had an alcohol addiction and abusive father shortly after Larry's birth. Family members convinced his mother to give Larry and Larry's brother up for an adoption. Norris, born February 5th, 1948. Childhood was rough, in and out of foster care. I mean, serial killer in the making.
Larry used to love to play with fire. He had burned down 2 sheds just to get his adoptive parents' attention. The punishment was his mom would make him take his pants off and lay down and she would burn him with cigarettes.
Yeah, I mean, lay it like all over his freaking body, like crazy person. All right, let's talk about IQs. Larry was actually really smart. He had an IQ of 138. He did really good in school. His only issue was he couldn't stay focused. He was antisocial, no friends, which they called him the brains of the operation.
Right.
And then Roy Norris, I guess, wasn't very bright, but he made up for it in size. He was a really big, not really big, but he was a big boy, about 200 pounds. So he was considered the muscles of the operation.
Larry liked to roam the neighborhood as a teen.
He would go on breaking in houses.
Right. He would go on to breaking in houses.
Just so he could move the furniture around.
He would never steal anything. He would just break in and rearrange stuff just to make people think, just to let people know that there was somebody in their home.
Yeah, like a sick joke.
It was kind of like a scare tactic.
Pretty much, yeah. And then Larry will go on to meet a Catholic schoolgirl named Mary. Blonde hair, blue eyes, wore a cross, necklace, but later on, she would go on to reject Larry, and a lot of speculation is that some of his victims mimicked Mary because they were blonde hair, blue eyed. Some of them. He also would make some of them wear crosses,
right,
during it. So they the victims were kind of substitute for the rejection that he held.
And where they found some of the bodies is where she had rejected him.
Yeah. They would go to the San Gabriel Mountain.
Right.
Mountains.
It was his idea to take them there, so
makes sense.
Yeah,
because he was comfortable there.
Well, and it had some significance too.
Oh yeah, I'm sure of that.
Larry got arrested at the age of 17. He was sent to a youth camp right before graduation.
Yeah, so he didn't even get to finish high school.
At the San Gabriel Mountains, Larry had several evaluations that showed problems with anger and had several warning signs
that he was
deeply disturbed.
Yeah, that he was really disturbed. And then in 1974, Larry would attempt to steal steaks from a market. And in that process, I think he said one of the workers were like following him around and made him feel uncomfortable or whatever. So he pulled a knife and he stabbed the worker, which saved him a murder charge then, because then he was only just sentenced to prison probably for assault with a deadly weapon.
Right.
Which that would lead him to meeting Norris, who is actually a serial rapist, which is always a perfect combination, I guess.
They would, in jail, they would make jewelry together, also hang out with other inmates. They hung out with an inmate named Richard
Shootman, yeah.
Shootman.
He was in there for killing a college girl.
Yeah, he was for killing a college girl. They would write up fantasies.
Yeah.
And sell them to the other inmates.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess in prison there's nothing better to do than to make pornographic fantasies and then sell them to other sickos.
Yeah.
And then Larry would eventually get out, move to LA, and get a job. And then Roy gets out 3 months later and follows Larry to LA, which Roy was actually supposed to serve 3 years to life in prison, but he got out early. Got out.
Right. It was like a good behavior type deal.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's what it was.
Yeah. Larry bought a van.
Mm-hmm.
It was a silver 1977 GMC
cargo
van. Sorry. They
soundproofed it, put a flooring in, police scanners, walkie-talkies, put a bed in it, a cooler, equipped it with a toolbox, and then eventually the van would go on to be named
the Murder Mac.
The Murder Mac. So at this point, what they put together in prison has started to become a reality. Because before they would go on to murder, they would take the van up to the San Gables Mountains and take different Polaroids and actually send them to Shootman as what we would think as an innocent, just buddies sending pictures,
right,
of them traveling. Later to come find out, it was actually them telling Shootman, hey, guess what we're about to do.
Yeah, because there was like one photograph of where Norris, I do believe, was like cutting a lock or something.
Yeah.
So the pictures looked really innocent.
To us. Us normal people. The ones that don't have a serial killer agenda.
Well,
I mean a public one.
Are we really normal? We do a murder podcast.
Trauma. It's just trauma. Okay. Who are we talking about first?
The first victim is Lucinda Lynn Schaefer.
16.
On June 24th, 1979.
Not her dad's birthday. I mean, technically it was, but 79 wasn't his birthday.
Last seen after a church meeting in
Rehonda
Beach. Norris spotted her. He tried to lure her into the van, and it didn't work. So they pulled over and they snatched and grabbed her. They took her to
a fire
road in the San Gabriel Mountains. They raped her 2 times apiece. Cindy asked if they could pray, and they laughed at her and said,
God isn't here.
God is not here, only devils. It was time to...
Yeah, when it become time to kill her, the two actually fought. Well, didn't physically fight, but they argued about whether to let her go or to release her. Roy wanted to let her go because basically he wasn't in it for the murder at first.
Right.
Which, in the end, I don't think he really meant to murder and he wasn't in for it. I think Larry was his BFF, best buddy, and he did whatever Larry said. But then Larry come with the, we've had her, she's seen our faces, if they show, we're criminals, or mugshots, that she basically could pick them out from a mugshot. So Cindy's life basically was done after that. Which Roy would attempt to strangle her, but would end up not being able to do it. I guess he actually, in the process, Larry was holding her down and Roy was attempting to strangle her but couldn't finish. He actually ran out of the van and puked.
Yeah.
So then that's when Larry pulled out the coat hanger, unfolded it, wrapped it tightly around her neck, and used pliers to tighten it until she couldn't breathe anymore. And then after she died, they wrapped her body in a plastic shower curtain and threw her over a steep cannon, which her body was never recovered.
Right. She's one of them that they couldn't find.
Yeah, her body was never recovered. And Larry actually said the reason why they picked victim number 2 so quickly was because Cindy wasn't up for his liking. Like, she didn't fight.
Right.
And she fought, but it wasn't what he wanted. It basically, it excited him for a minute, but it wasn't that ginormous push over the edge. So they were looking for. So then that's the reason why they moved on so quickly to victim number 2.
Right. On July 3rd?
8th.
1979, Andrea Joy Hall, 2 weeks after the first murder, she was 18, from Ohio. She was last seen spending the day at the beach with her sister. She went on hitchhiking to her boyfriend's. At first, she got a ride from someone else. Larry and Roy followed the car. They let her out.
The car let her out.
Yeah, the car had let her out. Then Larry convinced her to get in. Roy and Hall begun to fight. After the bloody fight, Roy was able to regain control, and he took her to the mountains where they raped her, took pictures of her before Larry took a ice pick, jamming it into her ear, like he saw in the movie. So
they watched a movie, and basically he was like, "Oh, this is really cool," but was soon kind of depressed at first, like mad at first, because it didn't kill her like it did the movie.
Right. He thought that it was gonna be.
Yeah, he thought it was just like final killer. So that forced him to strangle her, and her body was never found. Which we would go on to victim 3 and 4, which the torture, I think we all can agree on that one. The torture and stuff had gone worse by this point.
Oh, absolutely.
So Jackie Doris Gilliam, 15, and Jacqueline Leah Lamp, 13. On September 3rd, 1979, the girls were spotted at a bus stop bench. I guess they had been hitchhiking. Larry and Roy offered them a ride. Norris offered weed. The girls thought they had it made. So then, when they got a little comfortable, Roy took a homemade sack filled with BBs and hit Leah over the head, knocking her kind of unconscious. So while he was tougher and spinning around with Jackie, Leah actually almost escaped. This happened over by some tennis courts. So as Leah is halfway out of the van, Larry goes around and grabs her. She's screaming for help. People actually stopped.
Yeah.
And all because Larry said, oh, she's having an LSD trip, acid trip. They completely went back to playing their game, and Larry put her back in the van.
Which you'd think that would be a major concern. 13 and 14-year-olds having an LSD trip.
We're talking hippie times, though. When hitchhiking was popular, smoking weed and hanging out at the boardwalk was an everyday thing, especially in LA.
True.
Which they would drive off. They took the girls to the mountains. They actually kept the girls the longest. They ended up keeping them for 48 hours. Raping them, beating them, forcing them to pose in Polaroid sexually with Larry. Larry would stab Jackie with an ice pick in her breast, beating her, using vice grips to remove her nipples, also using vice grips to sodomize her. There were severe vaginal and anal tearing from the sodomy. They recorded them, and then when Larry would go on to kill Jackie, he then would take 2 ice picks and jab them in both her ears so hard that it penetrated her brain and got stuck in her skull. And then with Leah, he led out of the van and struck her over the head with a sledgehammer a few times. Unfortunately, Roy would lead them to the bodies, but they would only be partially found. But what parts they did find of the girls were really, you could just see the torture and just all around disgustingness that they had to face.
The one is the one where the pickaxe or the ice pick was broke off in her skull when they found it, correct?
I'm pretty sure, I can't remember if it's Leah or Jackie, but one of them were a virgin.
Right.
And he got super excited and wanted to record all of the nasty things. I mean, one or both. That's at 15 and 13, they both probably were honestly virgins at that time.
Right.
It's just, the way things would go. With Larry, he learned that he liked torture early on. And he also said that he strongly believes if his mom wouldn't have rejected him and he would have stayed with her, he wouldn't have turned out the way that he did.
Yeah.
I mean, I personally think he probably still would have turned out the way that he did. A sicko.
I think he probably would have too.
But then again, can we honestly say, did he learn to like torture, or because of the punishment that his adoptive mother put him through, get him to that point?
Yeah.
Because had she not put cigarette butts out and done what she done on him, would he have learned early on that he liked torture? And then reciprocated that torture onto non-consenting adults? Because I'm sure he didn't, victims, because I'm sure he didn't willingly pull his pants down, lay face down, and get cigarettes. I'm sure he didn't lay there. I'm sure he screamed in agonizing pain.
I mean, and he probably, It was probably the thought of he was bigger now, so he could actually be the victimizer instead of the victim.
True. Very
so
true.
it gave him that. I don't know.
That will to want to do it.
Yeah, because he's like, now I can do to them what was done to me.
Now with Roy, I think maybe this is just coming from me. I didn't find anything concrete, but you just don't wake up and become a serial rapist. So I'm thinking maybe in and out of foster care, he might have been raped himself.
Yeah. Well, and being in and out of this foster care system, that's not unheard of.
Oh, no. No, it's not. It's really not. So then we go on to victim number 5.
Shirley Lynette Ledford?
Ledford, yes.
She was 16 years old. And on
October 31st.
October 31st, 1979. They're not wasting no time.
No, they got a taste for it.
This is all within a year.
Honestly, it's all within, a year. Honestly.
Just within a span of months.
Yeah, honestly, if they wouldn't have gotten cocky, they most likely wouldn't have got caught as quick as they did. But they got cocky.
She attended a Halloween party. Shirley was hitchhiking home.
Yes.
From a Halloween party. She accepted a ride from Larry. And he pulled a knife on her.
During the
struggle, slicing her finger, and she was cut pretty deep. They didn't take her to the mountains.
No.
They tied her up and they raped her, beating her. Larry struck her with a sledgehammer, beating her in the face and breast area with his fist. Norris struck her with the sledgehammer.
They only kept her for 2 hours. Consecutively. 25 times.
After 2 hours, Norris strangled Shirley using a coat hanger with pliers. They dumped her body on a random person's lawn. So they
could get the public's attention. So, from what I gathered on victim number 5 is they drove around and took turns. They drove around and they took turns raping and torturing her. And then for their own amusement, I think it was more Larry's amusement than Norris, because Norris wasn't very bright and he followed everything Larry said and done. I think Larry wanted it. Goes back to he would roam the neighborhood and move furniture just for scare tactic. I think when they left the body on the lawn, it was to get the public's attention as a scare tactic.
Yeah.
That's what I think. And then Larry, I don't know. I feel he did it. His trophies were pictures.
Right.
Which in November of 79, leave it to Norris. Norris liked to talk. And that's what got them busted. Because Norris would friend a person by the name of Joe Jackson, who actually was another serial rapist. Norris would go on to tell Joe the stories of the raping and the kidnapping and the killing and the torture. And actually, it's pretty ironic that a serial rapist themselves would get so disturbed and narc on another serial rapist killer.
Right.
Which Joe would go on to contact the police, and then the police actually, I think they did it pretty smart because they did what you would call a silent surveillance on Roy, so they didn't spook him. Because back then, if they would have known the police were on them, it would have been so easy to bounce towns and never, catch them.
Because back then, police
Didn't really communicate.
They didn't really communicate.
No. So, with that being said, they did a surveillance. From what I gather, Roy went into either a pharmacy or a store, and one of the detectives walked up and they saw a open bag, and in that open bag it had marijuana in it. So when Roy come out, the detectives put a gun in his face and arrested him. Basically busted him at first for drugs, but because they busted him for drugs, that gave them probable cause for, probable cause to go in and raid Norris's house.
Right.
Hi, baby. Raid Norris's house, and when upon raiding it, they actually discovered over 500 plus Polaroids of multiple women, where they would just drive around hours on end and just take pictures of random women. So while doing the raid, from what I gather, somebody called the house. No, Larry called the house, and one of the people answered the phone, and he asked where Norris was, and they said he wasn't home, and that kind of spooked Larry. Like, something, spidey senses or whatever were tingling, and that spooked Larry, causing Larry to basically get rid of all the evidence, or what he thought they got rid of.
Right.
And left. Roy killed him. But here's the thing. Roy was a bit of an idiot.
Right.
So, where Larry was Mr. Smarty Pants and he's very good at manipulation, very good. Basically the jury wouldn't buy it at all. Which it only took the jury 10 days to convict Larry and sentence him to death by lethal gas. Unfortunately, due to liberals at that time, the Supreme Court being full of liberals, he did not see the gas chamber, or whatever you want to call it, because he would eventually die of natural causes on Friday, December 13th, 2019. And then Roy Norris would actually die 3 months later of natural causes. They died like old married couple, actually.
Yeah.
They were basically soulmates. Sicko soulmates.
Some people say they were soulmates.
Alright. And then,
Larry was a criminal sexual sadist who sexually abused.
Who sexually got aroused.
By physical and emotional pain and non-consenting victims.
On non-consenting victims.
And he was a master manipulator.
Yeah, master manipulator. And one thing leading into the documentary that I read, the prosecutor actually said the lead detective committed suicide because he was afraid that Roy and Larry would get out of prison.
Right.
And Larry would come after his wife and daughter. So basically, he thought by ending his life and killing himself, if Larry ever got out, he would basically spare his wife and daughter. Which is really sick, but sad to say, at that time, it wouldn't have surprised me if Larry and Roy wouldn't have walked.
Yeah, Larry had a really good chance of walking because he was actually a very good
manipulator.
And
he manipulated the one lady on the documentary so bad.
He could really get away with so much.
And honestly, I don't think they would have got caught, but Larry got cocky.
Oh, yeah, without a doubt.
Roy, if he had not had Larry, he would have got caught fairly quickly.
Yeah.
But because they literally took the women into the canyons on fire roads and disposed of their body, there was vultures, there was wildlife. If Roy had not led them to victim 3 and 4, they never would have found even those partial bodies.
Right.
Had they not dumped victim number 5 on a random lawn just to get attention, they would have never found her. It boils down to what made them become so very stupid. Was it the cockiness? Or was it the fact that they just didn't care anymore?
I think it was a little bit of both.
Could be. Because in this moment, Larry was the teacher and Roy was the student. It was a teacher-student relationship.
Yeah, which is another thing that the woman who was manipulated on the documentary said.
Yeah, she quoted that. She said that.
And
I believe it, though. There was definitely a teacher-student
relationship. And then
relationship.
she was like, he was Hannibal Lecter and I was Clarice. Like,
Tell me you have daddy issues without telling me you have daddy issues.
That was my thought.
I'm not saying...
I have my opinions of her.
I'm not saying because they were a serial killer that they aren't human, but at this point, you want to take a life of another individual, especially innocent individuals, you're not a human.
Right.
And in my personal opinion, they should have saw the death. They should have both been sentenced to death regardless of if you think or thought life should have been spared. Their life should not have been spared. In my personal opinion, lethal injection or even gas would have been too easy.
Right. I completely agree.
Now, that's not me saying I'm for the death penalty or against the death penalty. My thing is we knew they were guilty without a shadow of a doubt. There was no doubt they were guilty. So in that moment, they should have been sentenced to death.
Yeah.
There was no escaping that. Like, they had Roy's testimony. They had the tapes. They had the pictures. Because the tape was so horrific that it's not even allowed to be released to the public.
Right. They actually used it in, me and Kenny was just talking about this the other day. They actually used the audio as desensitivity training in the police academy.
I mean, I would understand, though, because the prosecutor said in the documentary, even after the trial, he had to get help himself.
Right.
Because the screams were so horrific.
Yeah.
So, like, with the tape and everything, there's no reason why the Supreme Court should have ever allowed these two individuals to just die peacefully at taxpayers' expenses. You want to be... I can't even compare them to an animal because animals aren't even that disgusting. Well, most of them are anyways. We're not going to insult the animals at this time.
Right.
They were monsters.
They really were.
And at one point, you would think, Bundy or Manson, they were bad, but reading into these guys, I think
Bittaker even had stated that he wanted to be like Manson.
Bigger than Manson. Well, buddy boy, in 5 victims, you did that.
Exactly.
In 5 victims, you did that. I just don't understand the whole torture to get your rocks off situation. Especially young girls like that. But then again, once again, back in the 70s and 80s, hitchhiking victims were super easy because everybody trusted everybody. I like to think they were the hippie days.
Yeah, right.
And Larry and Norris basically picked easy victims. And not to mention, you're two grown-ass men who overpowered little girls.
Yeah.
You couldn't even get women. You had to get little girls. That's my thing.
Right. It's just... They were definitely a different...
Yeah, they were
They were
definitely...
definitely different.
I would have to say, out of all of the episodes we recorded so far, this one kind of just irks a nerve because...
Yeah.
And they didn't even have the decency to go after women. They went after little girls, and you couldn't... Not to say that women would have been able to overpower them more. Some of the
would have
girls...
been a better chance.
Maybe. Some of the girls gave them a run for their money.
Oh, yeah.
Without doubt, they gave a run for their money. But at the same time, they had this planned out before they even got out of prison.
Yeah. And I wonder if writing the little novel things that they were writing with the other inmates and...
Oh, like little graphic pornography fantasies.
If that kind of sparked something. You know what I mean? Like made them think more into, maybe we can actually do this and get away with it.
I think that was the concept, but I think for Roy, it was more, I can have any woman I want.
Right.
And to Larry, it was, I don't think it was so much about the raping for him as it was the torture.
Yeah, he liked the
like
torture
he raped, but I feel like that was just to bond with Roy.
Yeah.
And I feel like Roy only tortured to bond with Larry.
Right.
Like, they might as well have just been a couple at that point.
Yeah, they definitely had a codependency relationship.
Yeah, and I would have to say I feel like Roy depended on Larry a little bit more than Larry depended on Roy.
Yeah.
I just... In the documentary, I can't remember, I'll put his name at the top, the prosecutor said when he saw Roy Norris' name come across his desk, I think he said he thought it was a joke because he was supposed to be in prison.
Right.
Like, that was the same guy who put Roy away the first time when he met, well, I don't know about the first time, but put him away and he met Larry to begin with.
Yeah, he had put him away
For
rape, and then that's when he had got out early.
Yeah, I think good behavior.
Yeah.
Which, hey, she could be a rapist, but don't worry about it.
But you would have thought the prosecutor would have got notified about that. But
I think now they do because they have to notify the victims, but back then, I don't think they would necessarily have.
Yeah, probably not back then.
Now that, like, there's a whole process, victims get notified, you know, basically there's a whole website now.
Right.
No, Larry was able to manipulate clear up till his last breath. I mean, people thought he had changed, but a serial killer just doesn't grow conscience overnight and change.
Yeah.
Because they really don't have the ability to really connect with people. And with Larry, I don't think he actually connected with Roy.
And
I think it was just a cover.
And that's all part of the manipulation tactics.
Roy was vulnerable. Larry saw an out. I just think he always intended on blaming Roy. I think Roy was an scapegoat. The only downfall is Roy didn't have the brains to pull off the things that Larry pulled off.
Well, and Roy couldn't really comprehend that he was just
An scapegoat.
He was an scapegoat.
Because here's the thing.
Because it took no time for Larry to just be like,
yeah,
it was him.
Yeah, it was him. He made me do it.
You know?
Which in the documentary, Larry was very minimal because he didn't, even though he was already found guilty, he didn't confess to really killing the girls.
Right.
He downplayed it.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Roy was not capable of planning out, like, buying a van, making it basically a mobile killing machine.
No, not at all.
You know, let alone the mountains. He basically didn't even put a thought process into being a serial rapist because he raped so many times and in and out of jail for it, you know.
Well, and they knew that the mountains was Larry's idea.
Yeah.
I mean, because he's the only one that place
connected to,
had a significance to. Out of the two of them, he's the only one that was significant to.
Yeah. But I think Roy got himself into a predicament, and he is just as at fault for the events as Larry. Unfortunately, I think Larry and Roy got it easy.
Mm-hmm.
And out of all the times that people had reached out to Larry, he didn't reach back out. You know, like people, media, but for some reason he picked that lady from the documentary.
Right. Well, and she said that she had wrote him for years.
A questionnaire.
Yeah, she had wrote him for years before he would even respond.
But she was also blonde.
Yes. Yeah.
I honestly, personally think that...
In the one girl...
It was his type. I don't know if maybe he got on the computer at that point, typed her name in, did a little bit of Googling and find out what she looked like, and then been like, oh yeah, that's my type. I mean...
Yeah, and he had... I can't say much about the woman, but... He has her hook, line, and sinker, even to this day.
She claimed that it's for research and that killers are humans too and everything, but you just don't get that personal for research.
Like she would give him her personal information,
involve him in personal life decisions, choices.
He called her while she was in labor.
Yeah.
She would refer to him as her child's uncle. I mean,
She claims it's to find the bodies, but here's the thing. He gave her the locations, but the bodies still were never found.
Even if so, it was still completely unethical at the end of the day.
In my personal opinion, yeah. I do agree. There's a line that should never be crossed, and I feel like that line was crossed.
Right.
And at one point, didn't she even claim his body?
I'm not for
sure on that.
Though. I know that he had put her in his will.
Oh, that might have been what it was.
As his next of kin.
That might have been what it was.
Because they had grown so close.
Mm.
But
you have to ask yourself, had he been able to get released, would she have been one of his victims? Maybe age might have factored to steer him away, but at that point, would it really have steered him away?
I think I can't say what I want to say because we could get in trouble.
Yeah, we don't want none of that.
Let's just say I think that she wouldn't be a victim. It would go the other. I think it would go. I think it would go another way.
Oh, okay.
And we'll just leave it at that.
Uncle Larry would become Daddy Larry. I could see that. But then again, it could have all been for work, resource. You know, we're just two people speculating, can continuously speculate about the craziness of that documentary.
There's so much. Like, you could do so much deep diving.
But I will tell you this.
And you could come up with so many different conclusions. Oh my gosh.
The documentary is on Peacock TV. Yes. You guys can watch it and form your own conclusions on it. We don't have to necessarily make you believe ours. 10 minutes into the documentary, and you're going to be like, yeah, she's out.
And you might not necessarily agree with us.
That is true. You may be like, oh, I totally see her point of everything, too.
And that's okay. We're not always going to agree with each other.
We're going to agree to disagree. We're going to agree to disagree. But that's going to be a wrap on this week's episode. Once again, I'm Cheyenne.
And I'm Heather.
And if you want to stay caught up on every episode, hit that like and subscribe button to not miss an episode. And new episodes every Sunday. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.